Welcome to the NewsClick special edition on budget 2021-2022. The budget, we had been told before it was announced that it would be historic. And one of the commentators writing after the budget said that it is a good interim budget, except that it is not an interim budget. It is the budget for the full year. And in some cases, the finance minister has projected so far as 5 years and 6 years. So this budget comes at a special moment, crisis of COVID and the lockdown, which caused extreme economic distress. We have two speakers with us today. We have Professors Vikas Rawal and Rohit Azad. And I wanted to begin with Professor Rawal. Do you think this budget is really a stimulus? Is there a hidden stimulus somewhere which is not immediately apparent?
Well, there is no stimulus. It's a budget which is, it's as if the government is in a denial mode. They're unwilling to accept that there is a recession, that there is an economic crisis that this country is facing. And you just written a budget in that framework of denial. So that's, I think, what the budget is about.
And there are specific sectors.
In fact, what is striking is a complete lack of attention to that. Complete lack of a stimulus, and you just kept waiting for that stimulus to come. And you thought when she was giving the speech that she's perhaps keeping it for the end. She's going to make some big announcement about agriculture. She's going to say something about expanding NREGA. But then it just ended, and it just never came. Right? So
one of the amazing things about this budget is that the allocation for almost every social sector, including the allocation under the head of social sector, have gone down.
Yes.
Now, but still, the government says that this is a budget about spending. So where is this spending going to happen? And do you think that as the year rolls around, there will be a need for, more and more demands would be raised on the government, and that this sort of penny pinching at this moment is only putting off the inevitable? You have to spend on something, otherwise people will suffer immensely, like in health or agriculture. Where is the agriculture spending? And what explains the priorities of the government? Once you go through the speech and read the budget, what according to you is the priority of this government?
No, you see, it's a very peculiar situation. The revenues of the government have collapsed. Government simply doesn't is not mobilizing revenues. So when they say it's about expenditure, they're merely saying that it's the excess of expenditure over revenues is now much more than it used to be. But that's not because their expenditure has gone up. It's because their revenues have collapsed. They just have they've not been collecting taxes, and their revenues have fallen so drastically that the only thing they now have is this idea of just selling off national assets to somehow keep some revenue. But even with all that, you basically don't have a lot of money. So it's only in that sense that expenditure is high.
Professor Azad, we were just talking about the government's intent to sell off public sector units, and at a wholesale level this time. Do you think this is going to be an effective strategy to bring money into the economy?
See, it's like, everybody was talking about this once in 100 years budget. Not everybody, but the mainstream media. And in one way, this is once in a 100-year budget, because they are trying to sell off something which nobody dared to touch, which is LIC. It's already, the thing had started last year, but LIC is very risky. Selling it off or privatizing in whatever way, because it has the savings of the low middle class, of poor also. LIC it mobilizes savings from a big section of the population. To put it in the hands of the private sector, like the insurance companies, let's say in the United States, you don't know what is going to happen to those savings. That's one. But more importantly, why sell it? LIC is not a body which is making losses. You normally sell things which don't give you anything, if at all you want to sell. Here is an asset which is giving you something. It's a revenue generating machine, so to speak, and you're selling that off. So somebody was saying, I mean, Professor Dhar was saying in the morning that you can't sell your family silver. You can sell it only once, but you can't sell it twice. So that is the problem with this strategy. And if you look at the data, in fact, the disinvestment targets that they had set, even last year, they couldn't meet it. So there's nothing suddenly that is going to happen, which will, even though disinvestment itself is wrong, but I'm saying to include that as a revenue to calculate your fiscal deficit is something which is anyway not going to happen. So what will happen? Ultimately, you'll have to then cut down your expenditure because you want to meet the target, which is exactly what they have done in the previous budget. Most of the, as Vikas correctly said, the fiscal deficit that has risen has not risen from the expenditure side as much as it has risen from the fact that the revenues have fallen. So, I mean, that doesn't give any injection of demand in an economy which has seen its worst recession in the history. So this was the time for a fundamental change in terms of what you can do in a budget. This was the most, if there was one budget, this was the most important budget in perhaps the history of this country. And what we have got is nowhere close to that. I mean, there's nothing in it which can be called historic other than selling LIC.
One very interesting statement in the budget speech that last year, the corporate tax rates were reduced to a level which is the lowest in the world. If you're not tinkering with the rates right now, then why do you think the government had to mention this? Is this an attempt to draw global interest in investing in India, that the tax rates are very, very low? And what is the meaning of very low corporate tax rates? What does it mean for our economy right now? I wanted both of you to answer that. If you could, Professor Azad, first, if you could go.
No, so two things on that. I mean, one is that you may want to incentivize all this, but incentive can only be taken if there is something. So for example, you give a lot of tax rebate. Doesn't mean investment comes by. What may happen is that this tax is going to be pocketed by the big corporates, as it happened. I mean, their profit after tax has risen, has soared in a time when the sales have fallen. So what they do is they'll pocket this. And as far as the international international investment is concerned, why would they come to a country or at this point when there is a global slowdown to come to a country just because you've given a tax rebate? People invest in a country when there is a possibility of a market. If the market itself has gone down, why would they invest here? Additionally, this is going to affect your budget numbers itself. If you give concessions, not only do you not get anything out of it, I mean, one could have understood if it influenced private investment, but it doesn't. On top of that, it affects your after, let's say, revised estimates, as you would see next year, of the budget numbers, which is essentially going to be to cut down expenditure from the projected levels themselves.
I think, yeah, exactly. See, two things. One is that even if I'm not wrong, the revised estimates of corporate tax collection for the last year are considerably lower than what they had budgeted, what the budget estimates were, and what they're projecting for next year is lower still. So the point is that the only effect that lowering corporate tax rates will have is that your revenue mobilizations are less. And you see, I want to make one point about this idea of, sorry to take you back to the idea of selling national assets. You see, you have to remember that in a period of economic slowdown, selling national assets would only mean two things. One is that, as Rohit was saying, there's no way you can mobilize what you are claiming you will mobilize by way of selling these assets. But my fear is that what you would end up doing is that you would end up eventually selling these assets for a song. It's like having a buffalo and selling it during a period of drought. You basically sell it for a song because, there's no market for it. So that's one. The other is that, one really has to understand this. In a period such as this, where, the crisis of livelihoods, incomes for people is unprecedented. In that period, you have a budget which does not have a single big ticket welfare scheme. There's not one major scheme that has been announced in this budget. Nothing to give relief to the people. You see, so that's really, stands out. I think that's the biggest problem with this budget. There's not one single major welfare scheme announced.
And obviously, if you are not going to tax those who are raking in the profits, then you will not have the room to ever have the stimulus that you need. Now, one
That's
of the
right.
interesting ideas again is this revival of the asset reconstruction. Now, there are a lot of private sector companies which are trying to, take care of the stressed assets of banks. You're trying to have a bad bank, and all these ideas have been floating around. But is this the right time to really drift off into this territory now? You're going to give it 20,000 crore rupees, and you're hoping that they will, sort of fix the problems in the banking sector. Now, the earlier RBI governors had said that the way to fix it is to fix accountability on the borrowers who don't repay loans. This doesn't seem to be that kind of an idea. Where do you think the government is heading? What does it tell us about the government's priorities? Is it infrastructure which they are after? Are they hoping that will generate jobs, etc.? Professor Rawal?
Well, I think Rohit might be better placed to talk about the financial sector. But to me, what does seem is that two things have happened. One is, or three things have happened. One is that the burden of wrong economic decisions made by this government over the last few years has fallen quite significantly on the banking system. So you do a demonetization, and one major hit is on the financial system. So each of these things has hit the financial system very badly. So the health of the financial system has gone from bad to worse. The second thing is that, as you rightly said, the big corporate borrowers, the NPAs created because of non-payment of sort of lack of repayment of by big corporate borrowers is something that has clearly hit the banks. Now, this is not something that you can, pass off bad debts from one bank to another institution and resolve the problem that way. See, unless you're willing to give a clear message that these corporate borrowers who are basically fleeing with public money are you're going to stop that. That signal is not that's not being done. Now, that's one. The other is that you've really not made any significant change in the way financial, public sector institutions, public sector banks, what is going to be done to take care of their health? What is going to be done to deal with the stress they have? There's no perspective here about that. So, I don't see that problem being resolved with this minor tinkering that they're doing. But Rohit may have something more to say.
No, I think this asset reconstruction is essentially, the experience so far has been that in the name of the IBC and bankruptcy code, what they have essentially done is they have sold off assets of industries, of let's say firms, at a pittance. They have sold, because they became NPAs, you sell it to a big buyer at throwaway price. You're not recovering. I mean, that's not really recovery. That's essentially just selling it off to a big player who gets all the assets at almost nominal prices of that. That's not really solving the problem. I mean, you are essentially writing it off. If one were to, if you were to be honest, you're essentially writing it off the books of the banks. And look at the write-offs themselves. I mean, this is just the from the restructuring. But if you look at the write-offs themselves, they have risen as well during the term of this government. And write-offs are what? Basically, the losses that the corporate sector is making. You and I are paying for it, because it's, after all, going from the government's kitty to these banks to write those loans off. I mean, why should we be bailing the corporates out who have messed it up at their end? I mean, they should be made to pay for it. So, but this government has had that approach as far as the NPAs are concerned. That's not really solving the problem. I would say you're actually giving a signal to the corporates to swindle funds in the future, knowing that the government is going to bail you out in the future as well. And not from our money, actually, effectively. It's, after all, our money.
Absolutely right. Now, the other amazing thing is that the allocation for almost every social sector, which agriculture, even health, a very minor increase, food subsidy, substantially low allocation compared to the revised estimate of the last year, education, 6,088 crore decline, social welfare, health ministry, even the planning and statistic collection budget has been, quite substantially reduced from 6,094 crore to 2,472 crore. ICDS, midday meal scheme, what does this lead to? How do we understand this? Because these are supposed to be the bedrock of any budget. The ordinary citizen waits for these announcements to see whether there will be egg served or potato served in the in the schools, for instance, whether they'll get better books and so on. Now where does the finance minister hope to make up for the bad results we've got on the nutrition front, for instance? Across the board, the things which people need haven't been catered to. One would think that the farmer protest is going on, so there would be something to assuage those spirits. Have you seen anything for agriculture, which is good on any of these fronts?
Nothing. The budget of agriculture ministry has been reduced. The budget of agriculture ministry has been reduced. So
by 6,500 crore almost. I see that figure.
Yeah. So it's actually quite incredible. That's what I was saying, that how on all the sectors in which major welfare schemes are run, you see a cut. Now, and to do that in a period such as this, to do this when this major protest of farmers is going on, you have as if they see no need whatsoever to provide relief to people. So it's what should one say? It's really disappointing, and I think it's one of the most disappointing budgets of even the NDA government. So,
what would have made it a little better in your estimation? Where would the finance minister's attention have gone?
Well, clearly they needed to, what they should have done is to substantially raise revenue through direct taxation, through wealth taxation, through raising corporate taxes, and use it to provide relief to the working people, to have substantial expansion of NREGA, substantial expansion of public distribution system, significant increase in allocation for procurement, significant increase in things like midday meals and so on, education, health. So, that's what you needed to do. You just needed to expand spending on these things, which would put money in the hands of people and would in fact create demand, generate employment and generate incomes, create demand for even the industry to grow.
Right.
The biggest constraint the industry right now faces is lack of demand, and you needed to put money in the hands of people so that the demand could be strengthened.
Right. We seem to have lost Professor Rohit for the moment right now. But the last thing is, have you been able to pay attention to the other development? The Finance Commission report was also tabled today.
I'm afraid I have not, unfortunately.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's also.
I've not looked at it.
Yeah. So is there something in this which would sort of rescue the budget from the doldrums which it seems to be in? Is there any? I think
I'm
the
afraid none.
the water resources, the sanitation and water has been.
No. In fact, it's quite interesting. PM Kisan,
Yes.
the revised estimate is significantly lower than the budget estimate. This year's allocation is about 10,000 crores less than last year's allocation. So even those things where there's a direct spending, there is. I mean, not only you are not increasing the amount of money that you give, because after all there is some inflation. You see, I mean, even if you want to maintain the real value of the transfer, I mean, that should have meant that 6,000 rupees should have been increased by some amount. Not only you don't increase, what you've actually done over the last year is that you've reduced the coverage of PM Kisan. Number of people who were getting PM Kisan transfers, who got the first tranche of PM Kisan, the number of farmers who've been given the subsequent tranches has fallen. So you see, you've actually narrowed down the coverage of PM Kisan. And that's what you've basically doing. That Pradhan Mantri Sichai Yojana, the allocation has been brought down. So spending on irrigation has fallen. You see, so sector after sector, scheme after scheme, you see a tightening of belt in a
Right.
period where you needed to actually expand spending. You needed to increase spending. So you've gone exactly the wrong way.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So
All right. Thank you, Pragya.
yes. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.